Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Brear, and welcome to episode 72 of the FS FinTech Insider Breakfast Show. In this show, we bring you the best and the brightest from around the fintech and banking landscape every single weekday straight into your homes at 8:30 BST, here live on LinkedIn. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by Kjerstin Braathen, who is the Group Chief Executive at DNB. On this morning's show, what we're going to be talking about is how the Norwegian bank DNB has evolved over the last few years and where it's going to be going next. So, Kjerstin, thank you so much for joining me. How's it going?
It's going well, David. Thank you so much for having me. I've really been looking forward to this. It's a great show you have.
Thank you very much. It's been entertaining to do these. I can't believe we've done 72 episodes of this. I have to say it's been kind of crazy. But for those who don't know, can you give us a little bit about your background and the role that you do at DNB? Because I think it's a really interesting one. And I mean, you've been with the bank for a little while now, haven't you?
Yes, I have. Must admit, it's been more than 20 years. When I joined more than 20 years ago, I think I had a perspective of 4 to 5 years. But that's banking. I think it's so fascinating. There's so many different parts of it. Just two words on DNB. We are the largest bank in Norway. We have a market share in retail of 25%. The market share in corporate of about 35. We are a universal bank with a broad product spectrum and also 15-ish% of our activity or so outside of Norway. So we are a broad coverage bank. I have been, as I said, with the bank for more than 20 years, started out as a corporate banker for many years, working very closely with the maritime and the offshore related industries. And I did that in various roles nationally and internationally, and then joined group management 7 years ago, where I headed up the SME part. Then I was the CFO for a few years. That's a good school before taking over the role at the CEO now close to a year ago. I started September 1st last year.
Fantastic, and that must have been a whirlwind of a year. As you say, the CFO role, you see pretty much everything across the group, don't you? But that top spot, actually, I mean, I was talking to Alison Rose, who's the CEO at NatWest, and she was saying a similar thing, which is the sort of vantage from the top is different as you sort of change roles and go through it. So, I mean, a lot has changed in that year.
A lot has definitely changed in that year. I particularly enjoy getting back closer to the business, to the customers, to the external world. Obviously, as CFO, the investor world and the capital markets are important, but really it's the customers that we live through. I almost say how good we are depends on what we're able to deliver to them, and that's where I started out many years ago. So I must say that's my real thrill of seeing what we as an organization can help our customers with.
Fantastic. And obviously, I mean, lots of good change over the last year, but some bad as well. Obviously, everything that's happening with COVID and coronavirus. I mean, you guys have kind of adapted to remote working pretty well, but how's it been going in terms of the difference between being remote? Obviously, you used to travel a lot as well for work, but how have you adapted to that remote working?
I would say we've adapted very well. I must say I'm so impressed by the organization at what pace we really managed to switch the organization from being physical to a close to complete remote working place. We managed to have close to 90% of our staff working from home on our systems within a matter of 3 days.
Wow.
Of course, Norway closed down a couple of weeks earlier than the UK. It happened quickly, and a lot of customers needed assistance, both on the corporate side as well as on the individual side. The government gave onerous packages for people that were furloughed, and the two main spikes in terms of need was actually advice information, need for installment reliefs, and liquidity facilities for the corporates. And the pace in which we scaled those was really a detriment, I think, to show the value of being a very digital bank, because we are in Norway. We've been working on that for many years, but we've never tested to an extent we have now the scalability of our activities. And many a time we've been talking about in the past weeks, that if this had happened 10 years ago, the outcome would not have been as good in terms of our ability to service clients, that's sure.
Yeah, no, it is. It's I mean, if there's any silver lining, we are lucky this is happening in an internet age rather than, as you say, sort of 20, 30 years ago, in terms of the impact would have been much more significant and much more long impact as well, wouldn't it? But I mean, how has your role changed in that period? Because I mean, I've sort of likened it a little bit with remote. It feels a little bit like you're sort of in a senior leadership role. You're a general sort of 5 miles behind where the fight's taking place, because your motivation and how you motivate people remotely, the sort of dynamic of that changes a little bit, doesn't it?
I mean, it's changed tremendously. At times, it doesn't feel like I'm doing the same job. And obviously, in the first intense weeks, I spent 15 hours a day in meetings with politicians, with organizations, with the team that was making sure the organization was running, with my management team, and it was just a constant run to have an overview of everything. Coming a bit further into the period, I reflected upon so many of the tools, if I can call them that I as a top manager used that wasn't available in the lockdown period. It's a lot about traveling. It's a lot about meeting people. It's a lot about giving speeches internally, externally. I mean, impacting through way of communication. And a lot of that was still physical if we look at the world pre-COVID. But I think we've been quite good at innovating through a crisis, and I mean, there's nothing positive about COVID, certainly, but we need to find the bright spots, and really taking the opportunity to innovate and change and benefit from what we see is certainly one. And I think an area that has been extremely important for me and the rest of the organization has been to develop our obviously digital capabilities, but also communication. As an example, I can share that we actually launched a brand new group strategy a few
Yeah.
to what we did 3 years ago when it was launched to a large group of people physically who was going to take it further. Now we had 9,000 out of our 10,000 people in the organization who have watched the show, and they've all gotten the same message.
Wow.
So we did that with a lot of good feedback. So
that's amazing. And as you say, it's what necessity sometimes forces you to make these changes, doesn't it? But actually, there will be things that during this period that you'll take forward, because, like I say, if you can drive that sort of engagement now in terms of internal content, it definitely will change how you communicate going forwards, right?
It's certainly not the last time we are doing it in this manner, COVID or not. So certainly, yes.
I mean, you touched on the point a little bit earlier on, which is, I mean, Norway is a very digital society, and actually a very cashless society as well, right? And actually, I mean, the advancements that you've seen from central systems over the last 5 or 6 years has been pretty significant. But I mean, how does that impact DNB as a bank?
It impacts us tremendously. We have now less than 3% of the transactions in Norway that are settled by using cash, and the COVID has been an additional element that has pushed that trend further into a direction towards other modes of payment, and certainly been a scaling of mobile phone payments. This is something we've worked on over time, and we don't have, I mean, handling cash is expensive. There are several aspects of handling cash. It's expensive, and it is sometimes difficult to control with regards to the origin of cash with relation to fraud. So for quite some years now, we actually haven't dealt with cash through our branches. We have only one branch that deals with cash over the counter, and that's our branch in the airport.
Wow.
So it's been a good development from a cost point of view, and then obviously also through the opportunity to develop alternative modes of payments that we're also quite actively involved in.
Mm. And as you say, that's an amazing change. I mean, how quickly has it got to that stage? Because I mean, different geographies all over the world are debating, the demise of cash and digital payments and all these things. But I mean, in Norway, this has sort of happened already. But did it happen by consumers just stopping using it, or was it because you guys provided the infrastructure and the capability and a better service than cash in order to move people across?
I think it is a push and pull mechanism. And I
Mm,
think that goes for most of the development. And most of the time, I would think that, or at least our experience has been that once we provide the infrastructure, actually make the move to take something away, the consumers are ahead of us.
mm,
Closing our branches is another of those examples. But this has happened, I would say, over the past 5 to 7 years. Norwegians are quick adapters of digital tools and alternatives. Also well educated by the fact that in terms of using digital processing and tools.
mm.
So gradually, I mean, credit cards and debit cards have definitely been the main mode of payment, very easy. And after that, increasingly also paying with wallets and mobile apps, and now more and more wearables. But I'd say the trend is probably accelerated over the past 3 to 4 years as almost all of the increased interaction with our customers, it happens over the phone.
Yeah.
We've had one source of growth of interaction, and that's through the app and the mobile phone.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Mobile really has changed financial services forever, hasn't it? In terms of, that single data connectivity and 24/7 access. It's just sort of changed the nature of that relationship, isn't it? But I mean, one thing that's always really struck me in Norway is actually, I mean, if you look at different regions. If you look at the UK, for example, each bank sort of fights for supremacy rather than actually really sort of driving cooperation against sort of central capability. Norway doesn't do that. I mean, you guys, cooperation, particularly amongst the sort of financial actors in the system, you guys do that really, really well. I mean, VIPS is a really good example of that. Bank Accept is a really good example of that. Can you guys talk about those for a little bit? Because, and I mean, particularly DNB's role in them, because I think, again, it changes the dynamic of actually how the ecosystem within the country really works.
It certainly changes the dynamics. And
Mm,
this is a tradition that goes way back of cooperating in certain areas and definitely competing in others. I can
mm,
assure you that there
mm,
is intense competition when we are in the customer facing and transactional related areas. But in relation to more base infrastructure, more in particular also relating to a national payment scheme, Bank Accept that you're talking about. Many, many years ago, the banks decided that they would join forces to make sure that this was standardized solutions across the markets. This has proven to be extremely important. It was in the short term, but I'm not sure anybody realized to what extent that would actually enable us to scale as an industry and as a country in a digital world. So there is this frenemy relationship that many of us talk about these days that has actually existed amongst banks in Norway for many years.
mm,
And you mentioned VIPS, which is the wallet and mobile payment app that we launched now 4 or 5 years ago, and it was a tremendous success. It scaled rapidly, and it had a huge, I mean, in relatively short time, it was one of the most popular brands in Norway.
mm,
Uh, but then came a very important time. There were competing wallets in the market. We were definitely the dominating brand, but many were trying to position themselves in this relatively new market. And we decided to invite all of the other banks into a co-ownership of VIPS. So we did that by merging with a couple of the other wallet brands. It's now a company that we own together, and through that we have 95% of the distribution to the Norwegian population.
Mm.
And this was an extremely important step, not to compete less on mortgages, not to compete less in other areas, but acknowledging that competition in certain areas of our industry is not going to come from the next door bank. It's going to come from non-banks, other type of companies. And we believe that we have a good offering to customers, but that means that we need to join forces in certain areas.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Like saying that for me is a very emotionally intelligent approach, because it relies on actually getting, like you say, getting competitors to work together in a collective there for the greater good of the industry. I think that's an amazing thing to be able to do, and especially given from your perspective with Vips. I mean, you guys were out in front, so in order to sort of share that responsibility in terms of moving the infrastructure of the country forward, it's amazing thing to do. I mean, collaboration, and I should say for anybody listening, like my experience with DNB and my experience with the sort of Nordic region, it is a very collaborative, it's a very excited region in terms of the changes that are coming along. I mean, as you say, you've been at the organization for 20 years. I mean, the change in the pace of life and the pace of business over that period is really significant, isn't it? So, I mean, how do you guys, how do you almost keep up with that pace? Because I've sort of felt the passion, I've seen the excitement for this type of change, but how do you develop and how do you change your approaches internally to almost keep staying ahead of the game?
I would say we do all we can to push forward for that pace, because it's not in the given nature, being a large organization, being a market leader, to have that DNA of pace. It's something that we as a group and managers constantly work on in our strategies, and we've done so. And as you're saying, I must just add, looking at this company 20 years ago, there's hardly anything that I recognize at all. It's like a completely different company. And the core element of changing, certainly we can talk about competencies. Certainly we can talk about pace of innovation. We can talk about organizational structures, a more agile team. But the most important part of it is actually about culture. And a big part of culture is involving people and talking through the world we live in, the trend in the industry we're facing, and how much that is changing. This was a big change for us, I would say, 5-6 years ago. Communication is something that we lifted extremely high up. And instead of filtering all of the communication through middle managers, we felt it was important for all of our colleagues across to see the threats, to see the opportunities, and to really communicate and talk through the need to change, and holding up and visualizing not the next door banking neighbor, but the Amazons and the Googles of this world, the challengers that came from other parts of the industry that were delivering so much better at that time customer experiences than we do. I mean, let's face it, we have taken our customers too much for granted if we go a few years back. And the way the world was developing, that was certainly not the future. And I, as a top group CEO of the bank, is not the best suited to decide on what is the change that needs to happen close to the customer. So we needed that really to mobilize the force from within the organization and give the room to run with it and develop the way they saw best.
Yeah, and that's I mean, that is by nature, I mean, that's agile in its truest sense, isn't it? That's sort of decision making being pushed down to the edges, and actually, it's very refreshing to hear a CEO say, "Look, I don't know best on these things," but actually, and that's, I guess, over the trajectory of your role, it's hearing and having. I always say it's a culture and a talent game. If I've seen firsthand, you guys have got a great culture and the talent in place to make these things happen, and your job is listening to everybody really at that stage, isn't it? Which is, it's a really interesting role, isn't it?
It is a tremendously interesting role. I think I have the best job that I could ever have. So of course I'm happy about that. And you're describing it very correctly. It's listening to the organization, trying to enable as best we can, but of course while at the same time keeping the necessary order and control, because we are in a very regulated business. We are in the business of taking risk. We need to make sure that we understand the risks. So you have this dual.
Yeah.
It will come back and haunt you at some stage. So you need connected agile, if I could say.
Definitely, it's like you say, it all is risk at the end of the day, isn't it? In terms of balancing all of those things. But I mean, one thing that's always struck me with DNB is, and many banks sort of globally really struggle with diversity, particularly at the top. And I don't just mean yourself, but actually, you guys have a very balanced workforce of all types, really. So, I mean, how have you guys sort of fostered diversity in the organization? And I mean, do you see that as a competitive advantage in terms of the impact that has on your culture?
Most certainly a competitive advantage. And I would also say that we continue to push through working on even increasing diversity. Where we've gotten the furthest is on gender, where we have in my group management team, I have more than 40% women. We have close to 40% women in leadership roles across the bank. And I'm convinced that you will never get the best people if you only try to hire for 50% of the population. I mean, there's things saying that the talent or experience and competencies is evenly spread. So talent being so important for our achievements, no doubt having a diverse and well composed working force is a competitive advantage. So how did we go about this? First of all, I must say it's something we've been working on for a very, very long time. It has been clearly set out expectations from the board. It's been clearly committed to by our previous CEO and also the top management group. And we've taken it from that level down to actually measuring results, because we need to measure and track to see the progress. And we worked on specific initiatives, such as initiatives to balance out wages that were not reasoned by anything than any rational arguments, by looking through our recruitment processes to try to find biases. Where did we have weaknesses that would hinder increased diversity? We work quite structurally with our talent development initiatives, with our leadership initiatives, where we are very focused on making sure that we have a diverse and representative group of people on each of these to build those who are becoming the future leaders of the bank.
It's amazing, isn't it? Like you say, it's not there isn't one thing. It's everything, isn't it? And as you say, it really changes the dynamic of the culture in such a significant way, doesn't it? I mean, it's amazing because so many organizations are scared of actually measuring and putting out metrics, but unless you measure it, you're not going to be able to affect it, will you? And I think it's very admirable that actually even now you're putting those metrics out, but you're working every day towards sort of making changes in those things, which is great. I mean, obviously, I mean, this period is quite difficult for financial services in terms of everything that's happening. And we were talking slightly about this before we went live, which is, I mean, the pandemic is obviously horrific on a human level, and the impact of that is so significant for the impact for so many lives. But the impact on the industry that we're in this second part, which is the economic impact. I mean, how do you see the next 6 months, a year really sort of progressing? Because I mean, it's going to be quite tough world, isn't it?
The world is a tough place at the moment. There's no doubt about that. Starting out with Norway, which is our home base, and then maybe reflecting a bit globally, I must say that it has been, despite the challenges we are living, it has been all about good news and points of seeing the light, I must say, in Norway, where we've gradually moved back towards a more normal environment over the past 6 to 8 weeks. So maybe that can inspire and give some hope elsewhere, because one of the things that we've seen after a lockdown that very successfully controlled spreading of the virus, immediately when we started opening up, people started spending. That was back to normal.
Wow.
The card use of people, what they were shopping was different. They weren't traveling, obviously, weren't going to restaurants in May, but their level of credit card use and transactions were at the same level that we would saw prior to the pandemic. We had dry powder in monetary policy, so interest rates were lowered during the lockdown. House prices are now continuing to grow. We're talking about a record month in terms of house selling in the real estate industry for the month of June. And after having seen our unemployment spike up to 10.3%, we're now already back to 5.1%. So what we are living these days is that all of the analysts are actually adjusting their estimates back into a positive area.
It's amazing, isn't it? That bounce back is phenomenal, isn't it?
It is, and I must say it's much more forceful than many expected. And I think that says something about the situation we're in, because this crisis, as most crises, are different from what we've experienced before. And the uncertainty is really what is troubling us most in a global perspective these days. We don't know what to expect, and people are scared. But to see the magnitude of how quickly we came back in terms of confidence, that has been quite encouraging. I think globally, what we don't know yet, I mean, we've seen unprecedented stimulus packages. We're seeing authorities and governments across the world that are clearly saying we will do whatever it takes. How successful will that be? As opposed to the economic slowdown and damage these lockdowns are doing, I think that's where the answer lies. And we can only hope that the virus will be increasingly contained throughout the world, and that the stimulus packages are protecting people from a tougher economic situation.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's probably a very good place to leave it, right? A point of optimism, because as you say, if people are coming out of the shell a little bit, it's great to see you back in the DNB office as well. So, people are going back into their offices. They're starting to spend again. The machine will really sort of kick into gear again. So, very a nice place to leave people with some optimism going into their day, I think. But Kjerstin, thank you so much for taking the time this morning to join us. Where can people learn a little bit more about the great work that you guys are doing at DNB?
Where they can learn it, dnb.no is where you can visit us and get lots of information.
One thing I'd note about DNB, you guys are pretty great on social media as well. So for anybody who is watching this, I'd highly recommend you guys kind of engaging with them on social or connecting over on LinkedIn, because I always think there's such a great stream of, again, it brings real personality and a sort of an insight into the culture, I think, which is fantastic. So connect with those guys on LinkedIn today. All right, guys, that's all we have for you today, I'm afraid, but we'll be back tomorrow with Nick Kerrigan, who is the former managing director of Future of Payments at Barclays. Going to be a really interesting one to talk through what the future of payments really looks like, and maybe what Nick is up to next. Hey, let's see where we get to. That's all we have for you today, I'm afraid, though. Again, thank you, Kjerstin, for taking the time, but we will see you same time, same place tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe.